The hotel called confirming your permanent residence check-in tomorrow. I hadn't booked anything. I drove there immediately and asked to see the reservation. The receptionist showed me the signature. It was my daughter-in-law's handwriting. Then I smiled and said, "Cancel it. And call the police, I want to show them something." Her face went white. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The phone rang, a sharp intrusion into the quiet rhythm of my afternoon. I wiped the damp earth from my hands onto my canvas apron, the scent of turned soil and rosemary clinging to my skin. The sun was warm on my back as I walked toward the kitchen door, a pleasant ache in my knees from hours spent weeding the flower beds. I assumed it was B, my neighbor, calling to confirm our weekly library run. The voice on the other end was bright, unnervingly cheerful. "Good afternoon, is this Mrs. Alina Hayes?" "Yes, speaking." "Excellent. This is Melanie from the Evergreen Residences, just calling to confirm your permanent residence check-in for tomorrow at 10 a.m. We have you down for a studio suite. We're so excited to welcome you to our community." I leaned against the cool formica of the kitchen counter. The words made no sense. "I'm sorry, you must have the wrong number. I haven't booked any residence." "Oh, but we have the paperwork right here," Melanie chirped, undeterred. "Everything's been finalized. Your daughter-in-law, Chloe Hayes, handled all the arrangements. She said you were eager for the transition. We have the signed authorization forms and the deposit." The world did not tilt, but it did go very still. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder. My garden, visible through the window, looked suddenly distant, like a picture behind glass. Chloe, my son Marcus's wife. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I am not checking in anywhere tomorrow. I have not authorized anything." A pause. I could hear the click of a keyboard. "Well, that is concerning. The paperwork seems to be in order. Perhaps you should speak with your family. We do require 24 hours notice for cancellation, and given the nature of the arrangement, there would be a substantial fee." "Substantial fee," I repeated, the words flat. "For forfeiting the permanent residency agreement. It's all in the documents Mrs. Chloe Hayes signed on your behalf." I knew then, this was not a mistake. A mistake is a wrong date, a misheard name. This was a structure built piece by piece in secret. Someone had constructed a future for me without a single consultation. The anger came not as a heat, but as a cold, solid weight settling in my stomach. "Where are you located?" I asked. Melanie gave me the address on the outskirts of the city, directions that involved a highway and a series of anonymous boulevards. I wrote it down on the pad by the phone, the one I used for grocery lists and B's book recommendations. The pen did not shake. My handwriting was precise. "I will be there within the hour to sort this out," I said. "We close at 5 p.m., Melanie said, her cheer now tinged with professional caution. "I will be there by 4. I hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen, in the house I had shared with my husband for 25 years, the house where I raised Marcus, the house whose mortgage I paid off alone after Robert passed. I looked at the clock. It was 2:15. I had time. I removed my gardening apron, washed my hands thoroughly at the sink, and changed into a simple linen dress and flat shoes. I collected my purse, my keys, my driver's license. I moved with a methodical calm that felt separate from the cold weight inside me. This was my training, the librarian's response to a problem. Seek the primary source. Verify the information. The drive was a blur of familiar streets giving way to unfamiliar commercial zones. The Evergreen Residences was a low, sprawling complex of beige stucco with cheerful blue awnings and meticulously landscaped shrubs. It did not look sinister. It looked like a place that sold independence with a side of gentle supervision. The lobby smelled of citrus sanitizer and vinyl. It was quiet, a muffled quiet that absorbed sound. Melanie was a young woman with a sympathetic smile. She brought out a file folder. "I'm glad you came in person, Mrs. Hayes. Miscommunications do happen." She slid the paperwork across the sleek desktop. There were several pages. An application for residency. A financial agreement outlining the transfer of funds from an account I did not recognize to cover the first 6 months. A care assessment form that listed me as needing moderate assistance with daily living management and noted observed cognitive decline. The words were a clinical assault. But it was the signature page that stopped my breath. At the bottom, scrawled in confident, looping letters, was my name, Eleanor Hayes, or rather a forgery of it. It was a good imitation. It had the general shape, the slope, but the tail of the E was too aggressive. The Y in Hayes lacked the gentle curve I always gave it. I had signed my name thousands of times on library cards, permission slips, tax forms. I knew its rhythm in my hand. This was a counterfeit. And next to it, on the line for legal authorized representative, was another signature. Neat, efficient, unhesitating, Chloe Hayes. I stared at it. I could see her signing it, perhaps at this very desk, perhaps at my own kitchen table while I was at the grocery store. That specific, familiar arrogance in the pen strokes. May I have a copy of these documents? My voice was remarkably steady. Usually, we'd need the authorizing party's consent. I am the subject of these documents, I said, meeting her eyes. And I am telling you I did not consent. I am disputing their validity. I believe you will want to provide me with copies before I involve legal counsel to clarify the matter of fraud. Melanie's smile faded. She hesitated, then stood. Let me go make copies. Alone in the lobby, I placed my hand flat on the cool surface of the desk. I focused on the sensory details, the texture of the manufactured wood, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant sound of a television behind a closed door. This was real. This was happening. The betrayal was no longer an abstract phone call. It was here, in ink and paper. I drove home slowly, the copies of the documents lying on the passenger seat like a poisonous thing. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows. My garden welcomed me back, the roses I had pruned that morning nodding in the light breeze. It looked the same, but I was not. The shock had crystallized into something clear and hard. Someone had tried to erase my life, to box it up and ship it to this beige way station on the edge of town. They had used words like cognitive decline and assistance as weapons. I unlocked my front door. The familiar scent of my home, books, lemon polish, the lingering ghost of morning coffee wrapped around me. It was a scent of safety, of self. I realized it was now the scent of a battlefield. I had just returned from surveying the enemy's plans. They were detailed, they were mercenary, and they were signed in a hand I knew too well. I placed the copies of the documents in the center of the kitchen table. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The ordinary actions were a bulwark. As the water heated, I looked out at my garden. I thought of Chloe's smile, her efficient way of organizing my cupboards when she visited, her comments about how much work this old house must be. I had mistaken criticism for concern. I had seen entitlement as ambition. The kettle whistled. I poured the water over a tea bag in my favorite mug. The steam rose, warm and damp against my face. I did not cry. I calculated. The first move had been made against me, a quiet, bureaucratic assassination attempt. The game was now in play. I sat down at the table, the documents before me, and began to think not with the heart of a betrayed mother-in-law, but with the cold, systematic mind of a librarian who had just found a deliberate error in the catalog. The next step was not to react, it was to research, and I knew exactly where to begin. The phone rang 20 minutes later, as if summoned by my thoughts. I looked at the caller ID, Marcus. My hand hovered over the receiver for a moment before I picked it up. The familiar weight of the handset was an anchor. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded tired, stretched thin. Marcus, how are you? I kept my tone light, the same cadence I used every Sunday. Busy, you know how it is. Listen, Chloe mentioned she might have left a scarf over there after dinner last week. A blue one. I looked toward the coat rack. No scarf. I haven't seen it. I can check the living room. Don't worry about it. It's probably in her car. He paused. So, how are you doing? Everything okay at the house? It was a standard question. Today, it felt like a probe. Everything's fine. Spent the day in the garden. It's coming along. I chose to bait the hook ever so slightly. Actually, I've been thinking it might be time to sort through some of the old files in the study. It's become a bit of a clutter. Another pause, longer this time. That's a big job. Do you want some help? Chloe and I could come by this weekend. The offer was immediate. Too eager? Or was I now seeing traps in every shadow? That's sweet of you, but it's just paperwork. I can manage. I was thinking of starting tomorrow. Okay, well, don't overdo it. If you find any of Dad's old tax stuff, just shred it. His voice relaxed a fraction. He was not a good actor. My son never had been. If he were part of this, his anxiety would have spiked at the mention of the study. His concern felt genuine, paternal, and entirely focused on my physical exertion. He was worried about my back, not my discovery. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing. When I hung up, I was certain of two things. Marcus was not a conspirator, and his wife had likely just sent him on a fact-finding mission about the scarf that did not exist. She was checking on me. That decided my next move. I dialed B's number. Eleanor, I was just about to call you. Did you get the new Louise Penny in? Not yet, B. Can you come over? I need to show you something. She heard it in my voice. The pleasant lilt I used for our book discussions was absent. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Put the kettle on. I did. By the time the familiar tap-tap of her knuckles sounded on my back door, the tea was steeping and the documents were still centered on the table. B let herself in, a small woman with a crown of silver braids and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at my face, then at the papers. All right, she said, shrugging off her light cardigan. Start talking. I walked her through it. The phone call, the drive, the lobby. I handed her the copies. I watched as her eyes scanned the pages, her lips moving slightly as she read the damning phrases. Her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, then to a hardening, flat anger. She placed the last page down carefully, aligning its edge with the table. That little viper, she said, the words low and precise. She signed your name. She did. And Marcus. I just spoke to him. He asked about a missing scarf. He told me not to strain my back cleaning the study. He's in the dark. He's also under her thumb, but he's not part of this. B nodded, accepting my assessment. She reached for her teacup but didn't drink. So, she's trying to commit you to take the house. It appears to be the plan. The financial agreement shows a transfer from an account I don't have. She must have set it up. The goal is to get me into that facility, liquidate my assets to pay for it, and take whatever's left. Probably argue I'm incapable of managing my own affairs. The cognitive decline box, B said, tapping the form with a blunt finger. I'd like to decline her into the next century. A faint, cold smile touched my lips. It was the first time I had almost smiled since the call. Reactive anger won't help us. She's already made her moves. We need to make ours. B leaned forward. You've got that look, the library look, when you used to hunt down a missing periodical. It's a research problem. She has created a narrative. I need to disprove it and establish the true one. To do that, I need evidence. More than this. I gestured to the hotel forms. I need to understand her full plan. I need to find every document she's forged or every piece of information she's gathered. I need it before I confront her or go to the police. Spring cleaning, B said, her eyes lighting up. You told Marcus you were cleaning the study. Yes, and I need a witness. Someone to help me look, and someone who can later corroborate what we find, and when we found it. You have one. What's the protocol? We start tomorrow morning. We go through every file in my desk, my filing cabinet. We look for anything that seems out of place. Any paperwork I don't remember signing. Bank statements I don't recognize. Drafts of legal forms. Notes in her handwriting. We treat my own home like a crime scene. B finished her tea in one decisive gulp. We'll need boxes for sorting and labels. I have some in the garage. Bring them. We will be thorough. We will be slow. We will not rush. If we find something, we note its exact location and we do not remove it. We photograph it in place. You've been watching detective shows. I've been cataloging information for 30 years, B. The principle is the same. Provenance and documentation. She stood up, energy crackling off her. What do we do if we find the smoking gun? Call the police right then. Not immediately. We need the full picture. Once we have it, we decide on the presentation. Confronting Chloe without all the facts gives her room to lie, to destroy evidence. We need to be able to trap her with her own paperwork. Bea looked at me, her head tilted. You're not even crying. I looked at the papers. Crying is for later. Right now, there is work to do. Anger is a fuel, but it burns messy and fast. I need a clean, cold engine. She put a hand on my shoulder, a brief, solid pressure. All right, Alina, we'll build you an engine. I'll be here at 8. We'll have coffee first. Strong. After she left, I cleared the teacups. I moved the documents from the table to a plain manila folder, which I placed in the center drawer of my desk. I did not lock it. Locking it would suggest I had something to hide. I wanted everything to appear normal. I made a simple dinner. I ate it at the table, looking at the empty space where the folder had been. The house was quiet, but the quiet was different now. It was no longer empty, it was charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I was not a victim waiting in her home. I was a general in her headquarters, reviewing the maps of a war she did not yet know had begun. My enemy had assumed I was a fragile thing to be moved aside. She had confused solitude with weakness and order with passivity. Tomorrow, with Bea as my ally, I would begin to prove how deeply she had miscalculated. The first phase was reconnaissance. We would turn our own territory and uncover every secret buried within it. The sun was just clearing the oak tree in the backyard when Bea arrived at 8 the next morning, true to her word. She carried 2 collapsed cardboard boxes and a roll of blue painter's tape under one arm. I had already brewed a full pot of strong coffee. The ordinary domesticity of the ritual was a necessary grounding. We did not speak of the task ahead until we were seated at the kitchen table with our mugs. Procedure, I said, laying out a notepad and a pen. We work together. 1 box for documents that are unquestionably mine and in order. 1 box for anything that seems questionable, out of place, or that I do not immediately recognize. We handle each piece of paper only by the edges when possible. We note the file folder or location where we found it before moving it. Bea gave a firm nod, her librarian's assistant from decades ago falling seamlessly back into place. Chain of custody, understood. We started in the study. The room was small, dominated by an old oak desk that had been Robert's and a 2-drawer filing cabinet. Morning light streamed through the window, illuminating motes of dust we disturbed as we moved. It was just a sunny home office. We began with the filing cabinet. The top drawer contained household documents, warranties for long-dead appliances, manuals, paint samples from when we redid the hallway. The bottom drawer held the important files: tax returns going back 15 years, property deeds, insurance policies, investment statements. I knew this drawer intimately, or I thought I had. We worked slowly. I would pull out a hanging folder, examine each paper within it, and describe it to Bea, who made a note on our pad. 2017 tax return, signed copy. Homeowners insurance policy, renewal 2020. It was monotonous, lulling. The tension was a low hum beneath the routine. It was in the current bills folder, tucked between a water bill and the quarterly property tax statement, that I found the first anomaly. A single sheet of paper, printed from a computer. The header read Draft Power of Attorney. It was not a formal form, but a typed document. It named Chloe Hayes as my attorney, in fact, granting her broad powers over my financial assets and real property. My name and social security number were typed in the appropriate blanks. It was unsigned. I held it up by its corner. Bea leaned in to look. A draft, she whispered. Yes, not executed, but it shows intent, preparation. I placed it carefully in the questionable box. Bea noted it. Found loose in current bills folder, bottom drawer. The next hour yielded nothing unusual. We emptied the filing cabinet completely, ensuring no papers were stuck to the bottoms or sides. We moved to the desk. The center drawer held pens, stamps, the manila folder with the evergreen documents. The side drawers were more cluttered. Old check registers, boxes of staples, a collection of birthday cards from Marcus over the years. I felt a pang, looking at his childish scrawl on a card from 2 decades ago, but I set it aside in the personal pile and kept going. The bottom right drawer was the deepest. It contained larger flat items, a portfolio of Robert's architectural drawings, some framed certificates. Beneath these, my fingers touched a slick, glossy folder. I pulled it out. It was from a financial services company I did not recognize. Inside were brochures for reverse mortgages and home equity lines of credit. Paperclipped to the front was a sticky note in Chloe's distinctive, looping script. It read, "Options for EH, high equity, low monthly. Discuss with M." B read the note over my shoulder. "Discuss with Marcus. You think he knows about this?" I think she was preparing to discuss it with him. To convince him it was a good idea for me. This is the groundwork. I added the folder to the questionable box. We were nearing the end, the desk nearly empty, the floor around us organized into neat piles. I was beginning to think we had found all we would. Then I reached into the very back of the same deep drawer. My fingers brushed against what felt like a business envelope. I retrieved it. It was a standard white envelope, sealed. It had no postage, no address. Only my name was written on the front in Chloe's handwriting. Aliner. "That's not your usual mail," B stated. "No." I slit the envelope open with my letter opener. Inside was a single-page credit report. It was not mine. The name at the top was Chloe Ann Hayes. The social security number was partially redacted, but the details were clear. I scanned the columns. Several high-limit credit cards were near their maximums. A personal loan from an online lender showed a significant balance. The credit score was in the low 600s. A note at the bottom from the credit bureau indicated several recent hard inquiries from auto dealerships. I handed it to B without a word. She read it, her lips pressed into a thin line. "She's drowning." "She is," I said, my voice flat. "This is the motive, this is the why. The house is the only asset of significant value she has any potential access to, through Marcus, through me." "And you were the obstacle," B finished. "A healthy, independent woman in her home is a problem. A woman with cognitive decline in a permanent residence is a solution." The pieces locked together with an almost audible click. The hotel, the forged assessment, the power of attorney draft, the reverse mortgage brochures, the debt. It was a complete, ugly picture of avarice and desperation. She hadn't just wanted me out. She needed me monetized and neutralized to solve her own financial crisis. We finished our search. We found nothing else. The two items in the questionable box, the power of attorney draft and the credit report, along with the brochures, were our entire haul. It was not a large collection, but it was devastatingly coherent. We reassembled the study, returning the innocent documents to their files and drawers. The questionable box we placed in the hall closet, on a high shelf behind spare blankets. The evergreen folder joined it. Back in the kitchen, we drank more coffee. The morning was gone. "What's the next step?" B asked. "You have the motive, you have the attempted action. You could go to the police now." I shook my head. "It's strong, but it's still circumstantial to an outsider. She could claim the power of attorney draft was something I asked her to look into, that the credit report was in my drawer by mistake, that the hotel was a misunderstanding, a clerical error. She would lie, and without a direct admission, it becomes a messy family dispute. So we need her to admit it. We need her to confirm the narrative in a way she cannot later deny. We need her to think her plan is still progressing, that I am compliant. We need to guide her into a corner where the truth is her only exit." B raised an eyebrow. "You're going to talk to her?" "Not yet. First, I need to understand the other player. I need to see my son." He called that evening. I had expected it, the timing fitting the pattern of her pressure. His voice carried a forced casualness. "Hey, Mom, I'm in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by for a bit. That okay?" "Of course," I said. "I just made a pot roast. There's plenty." A slight hesitation. "You didn't have to go to any trouble." "It's no trouble. I'll see you soon." I set an extra place at the kitchen table. The ordinary act felt like a performance. I was laying a stage for a scene where only one actor knew the true script. I needed to watch him, to listen not just to his words, but to the spaces between them. Was he a co-conspirator or another piece on Chloe's board? He arrived 20 minutes later, looking more worn than he had sounded on the phone. Marcus had his father's build, tall and solid, but his shoulders were perpetually slightly hunched, as if bearing a weight he couldn't name. He kissed my cheek, his usual greeting, but it felt quick, distracted. "Something smells good," he said, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair. "It's just the roast. Sit, how was work?" We began the familiar dance of a mother and son having a weekly dinner. He talked about a project at his engineering firm, a problem with a client's specifications. His words were technical, comfortable. I listened, nodding, passing him the butter for the rolls. I watched his hands. They were steady. He did not fidget. He did not avoid my eyes when speaking about work. It was when the conversation turned to his home life that the shift occurred. I poured us both more water. "And how is Chloe? Recover from that flu she had?" He looked down at his plate, cutting a piece of meat with more focus than it required. "Yeah, she's better, back to her usual self." "Which is always busy," I said, a gentle, generic observation. "You have no idea." The sentence escaped him on a sigh, heavy with unspoken fatigue. He caught himself, took a quick sip of water. "I mean, she's got a lot on her plate, planning stuff." "What kind of stuff?" He shrugged, a noncommittal movement. "Just future planning. You know how she is, likes to have everything mapped out." The opening was there. I applied gentle pressure. "It's good to be prepared. I was thinking about the future myself, actually. This house is a lot for one person. The garden, the upkeep." His head came up, his eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something. Alarm, guilt, or just surprise. "What are you saying, Mom? You're not thinking of moving?" I kept my expression neutral, mildly contemplative. "Not seriously, but it's prudent to consider options. Maybe a smaller place one day, or one of those senior communities. They seem to have a lot of activities." I deliberately used the benign term senior community, not permanent residence. He put his fork down. "You don't need to do that. You love this house. Dad built the porch for you." "I do love it, but things change. I just want to make sure I'm not a burden on anyone." I let the word hang in the air between us. His reaction was instantaneous and visceral. His face flushed. "A burden? Mom, don't ever say that. Don't even think it." The emotion in his voice was raw, pained. It was not the reaction of a man who had signed off on a scheme to warehouse his mother. It was the reaction of a son who had heard that word somewhere else recently and been wounded by it. "I'm just being practical, Marcus." "Well, don't be." He pushed his plate away slightly, his appetite gone. "This is your home. You're fine here. You're more than fine. You're independent. That's a good thing." He was arguing with me, but it felt like he was arguing with a phantom, rehearsing points meant for another audience. "Chloe doesn't think it's a lot for me. The stairs, the yard." He flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. "Chloe has opinions, but they're just opinions. This isn't her decision, it's yours." He said the last part firmly, as if trying to convince himself of a boundary he struggled to maintain. The pieces fell into place with quiet finality. He was not her partner in this. He was her obstacle. She was working around him, forging signatures, making plans, likely feeding him a narrative about my inevitable decline and the logical, caring solution. His stress, his exhaustion, it was the friction of being pulled between his wife's relentless planning and his own loyalty to me. He was in the dark, but living in the gloom her scheming cast. A profound sadness settled over me, cold and clear. My son was not a villain. He was a casualty. His crime was passivity, a failure to see the monster his wife had become until it had already drawn up blueprints for my imprisonment. That failure would have consequences, but it was not malice. I reached over and patted his hand, a mother's gesture. "You're right, it is my decision, and I'm not going anywhere. I was just thinking out loud. Forget I mentioned it." He grasped my hand, his grip tight. "Good, please just be here, be okay." We finished the meal with lighter talk, but the air was charged with what had been revealed. He helped me with the dishes, a silent apology in the clatter of plates. When he left, his hug was longer than usual. "Love you, Mom." "I love you too, Marcus." I closed the door and locked it. I leaned against the cool wood. The assessment was complete. The enemy was singular, Chloe. Marcus was a separate problem, one of heartbreak and difficult choices that would come later. For now, his ignorance was my advantage. It meant Chloe was operating alone, which made her more desperate but also more vulnerable. She would not have his support when the truth emerged. She would only have his shock and anger. My path was now unambiguous. I had the evidence of the act. I had confirmed the motive. I had isolated the perpetrator. The next move required drawing her out from behind the veil of forged documents and secret plans into a direct confrontation. I needed her to face me, to believe she was still winning, and to entangle herself in her own lies. I went to the hall closet, retrieved the manila folder from the high shelf, and placed it back on the kitchen table. The time for passive evidence gathering was over. It was time to set the trap, and for that, I needed to make a phone call. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a tool becoming a weapon. I had rehearsed the tone in my mind, vague, slightly weary, open to suggestion. I could not sound like the Alina who had driven to the Evergreen or who had sifted through files with cold precision. I needed to sound like the woman Chloe believed me to be, pliable, perhaps a little confused, ultimately manageable. I dialed her mobile number. It rang 3 times before she answered. Chloe Hayes. Her voice was bright, professional, the one she used for work calls. Chloe, it's Alina. A micro pause, a shift in background noise as if she had moved to a quieter space. Alina, hi, is everything all right? The concern was smooth, practiced. Yes, I'm fine. I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been doing a lot of thinking since Marcus was over for dinner. I allowed a sigh to creep into my voice, the sound of someone burdened. Okay, she said, her tone inviting confidence. It's this house. Marcus is right, I do love it. But he's also right that it's a lot. The stairs, the garden. I'm not as young as I used to be. I let the sentence hang, a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. Those are valid concerns, Alina. It's very smart of you to be thinking proactively about your needs. Her voice warmed, becoming counselor-like. It's about maintaining your quality of life, right? Exactly, quality of life. I just don't know what the options are. It's all so overwhelming. I injected a note of helplessness, carefully measured. Well, Marcus and I have talked about this a little. There are so many wonderful, supportive communities now. Places where you'd have your own space, but without the maintenance worries. They have social activities, meal plans, even transportation. She was already pitching, unable to help herself. The eagerness was there, just beneath the veneer of helpfulness. It sounds expensive. Sometimes, but when you factor in the equity from this house, it can be very manageable. It's about using your assets smartly to secure your future. The word equity slid out, oily and revealing. I've actually done a bit of research. I could bring some information by if you'd like, just to look. No pressure. The bait was taken. I could almost see her leaning forward, eyes gleaming. That might be helpful, I said slowly, as if reluctantly convinced. Just to see, maybe we could talk tomorrow. I don't want to bother Marcus with this. He seems so stressed lately. Tomorrow is perfect, she said, a little too quickly. She corrected her pace. I mean, I can come by in the afternoon, say 2 o'clock. We can have a cup of tea and just look at some possibilities. Knowledge is power, Alina. Knowledge is power, I repeated, my voice soft. 2 o'clock is fine. I'll see you then, Chloe. Looking forward to it. Bye now. I placed the receiver back in its cradle with deliberate care. The performance was over. My face, which had held a mask of weary confusion, went smooth and blank. I felt nothing but a clear, sharp focus. Her greed had echoed through the line, unmistakable. She wasn't just coming to advise, she was coming to close a deal she thought was already in motion. I had less than 24 hours to prepare the stage. My first call was to be. She's coming tomorrow at 2. You need to be here, but out of sight. The living room. She'll bring brochures. I'll let her talk. When she's fully committed to her performance, I'll present the evidence. I need you to witness her reaction and her subsequent confession. Where do you want me? Bee's voice was all business. The hallway to the kitchen. The door will be slightly ajar. You'll hear everything. When I give the signal, I'll say, I think we need a witness to this discussion. You come in. Signal received. What's the endgame? A written, signed confession detailing the forgery, the fraudulent reservation, and her intent. We get that, and the legal path becomes a simple matter of filing it with the police. Got it. I'll be there at 1:30. Next, I retrieved the evidence box from the hall closet. I laid the items out on my bed. The Evergreen Residences packet, the draft power of attorney, the reverse mortgage brochures with her sticky note, her credit report. They were a narrative in paper. I arranged them in the order I would present them, building the case from motive to action. I then went to my desk and wrote a single sentence at the top of a fresh sheet of paper. I, Chloe Ann Hayes, hereby confess that. I left the rest blank. She would fill in the details. I placed this sheet, along with a pen, in the top drawer of the side table next to my favorite armchair in the living room. The rest of the day was spent in mundane preparation. I baked scones. The ordinary domestic act was calming. The scent of baking butter and flour was a counterpoint to the cold scheming. I set out my good teacups and saucers. I tidied the living room, not to impress, but to create a setting of normalcy, of a gracious hostess inviting a conversation. That night I slept a deep, dreamless sleep. There was no anxiety, no tossing. The decision was made, the plan set. The emotional storm had passed, leaving a landscape of crystalline resolve. I was not walking into a confrontation. I was presiding over a tribunal. At 1:45 the next day, Bea arrived silently through the back door. She nodded to me, took up her position in the hallway, and pulled the door until only a thin sliver of light connected the two spaces. I sat in my armchair, a book open on my lap. I did not read it. I listened to the clock tick. At 2 minutes past 2, the doorbell rang, a cheerful two-tone chime. I closed the book, set it aside, and stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked to the front door and opened it. Chloe stood on the porch, a wide, sympathetic smile on her face. In her arms was a sleek leather folder, bulging with papers. "Eleanor, you look well," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Thank you, Chloe. Come in. I've put the kettle on." She followed me to the living room, her eyes taking in the tidy space, the set tea tray, with an approving nod. She placed her leather folder on the coffee table with a soft thud, a promise of solutions contained within. "This is so cozy," she said, settling onto the sofa. "You've created such a peaceful haven here." "It's home," I said simply, pouring the tea. "Milk, sugar." "Just black, thanks." She accepted the cup, her movements graceful. She took a sip, then gestured to her folder. "I'm so glad you're open to this conversation, Eleanor. So many people wait until there's a crisis, and then options are limited. You're being very brave." I sat in my armchair opposite her, cradling my own cup. "You mentioned using equity. Can you explain that?" Her face lit up with the pleasure of explanation. "Of course, the house is your primary asset. By taking out a reverse mortgage or a home equity line, you unlock that value. That capital can then fund a comfortable, carefree lifestyle in a dedicated community. You wouldn't have to worry about property taxes, repairs, any of it. It's freedom." She opened her folder and began pulling out glossy brochures. Pictures of smiling silver-haired couples playing bridge, swimming in pools, dining in elegant cafeterias. I looked at the brochures without touching them. "These places look very social. I'm not sure I'd fit in." "Nonsense. Everyone finds their niche, and you'd have your own private apartment. It's the best of both worlds." She slid a brochure for a place called Sunset Meadows toward me. "This one has a fantastic library. I thought of you immediately." "How does one apply to these places? Is there a long wait list?" "Sometimes, but with the right financial pre-qualification, things can move quickly." She selected a different brochure, this one for the Evergreen Residences. My heart beat a steady, slow rhythm. She pointed to a photo of a garden. "This one is particularly good. I've actually already made some preliminary inquiries there for you. They have a wonderful staff." I took a slow sip of my tea, placing the cup back on its saucer with a quiet click. "The Evergreen Residences, that name sounds familiar." "Oh, it's very well regarded," she said smoothly, missing the hint of ice in my tone. "I believe I received a call from them recently, a confirmation call." Her hand, which was reaching for another brochure, froze for a fraction of a second. Then she continued the motion, her smile not faltering. "Really? That must have been a general marketing call. They're quite proactive." "It wasn't a marketing call," I said, my voice still calm, level. It was a confirmation call for my permanent residence check-in, scheduled for tomorrow. The smile on her face became fixed, a porcelain thing. That doesn't sound right. There must have been a mix-up. I only made inquiries. The woman I spoke to was named Melanie. She had paperwork, signed paperwork. I leaned forward slowly and opened the drawer of the side table. I pulled out the manila folder I had placed there earlier. I laid it on the coffee table, atop her glossy brochures. I went to see it for myself. Her eyes dropped to the folder. The color drained from her face, leaving 2 spots of high pink on her cheeks. You went there. I did. They showed me the file. I opened the folder. I lifted the first page, the reservation form, and turned it so she could see the signature line. This is my signature, except I didn't write it. It's a forgery. I let that sit. Her breath hitched. And this, I pointed to the representative line, is your signature. You did write that. Her mouth opened, then closed. The helpful daughter-in-law persona cracked, revealing panic beneath. Eleanor, listen, this is not what it looks like. I was trying to get information. They must have misunderstood. They're very sales-driven. They had a completed care assessment form, I continued, as if she hadn't spoken. I showed her the page. It says I have cognitive decline. It says I need moderate assistance. Who observed that, Chloe? You. She stood up abruptly, her tea sloshing in its cup. This is ridiculous. I was trying to help you. You're clearly not thinking straight if you're accusing me of some conspiracy. Sit down, I said. The words were not loud, but they were absolute. They carried the quiet authority of a librarian silencing a disturbance. She stared at me, shocked by the command. Slowly, she sank back onto the sofa. I removed the other documents from my folder. I placed the draft power of attorney on top of the reservation. I found this in my study, a draft nomming you, unsigned. Then I placed the reverse mortgage brochures with her sticky note. Options for EH, you were discussing my equity with Marcus. Finally, I placed her credit report on the very top. The numbers and balances were stark under the lamplight. She looked at the pile of paper, at the story of her avarice laid bare. All pretense vanished. Her face contorted, not into remorse, but into a raw, furious defensiveness. You went through my things, she hissed. I went through my own things in my own home. This was in my desk. You're in significant debt, Chloe, and you saw my house as the solution. It is a solution, the words exploded from her, sharp and shrill. You sit here in this big, empty house all by yourself while Marcus and I struggle. We live in a shoebox apartment. We have student loans, car payments, credit card debt. You have all this equity just sitting here doing nothing. And you're getting older, things will happen, you'll fall, you'll forget things, it's inevitable. I was trying to make a plan for everyone. You were trying to make a plan for yourself, I corrected, my voice still coldly even. You committed fraud. You attempted to have me declared incompetent. You tried to have me committed to a facility to steal my home. This isn't a plan. This is a crime. You are a burden, she spat, leaning forward, her eyes blazing. A stubborn, independent burden who refuses to see reality. You think Marcus doesn't worry? You think he doesn't lie awake at night wondering if you've fallen down the stairs? I was relieving him of that. I was taking care of it. The room was silent after her outburst. The air vibrated with her fury and my icy calm. She had said it. The justification was out. My own son's worry, twisted into a weapon for her use. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, quietly, I think we need a witness to this discussion. The door to the hallway swung open without a sound. Bea walked into the living room. She did not look at me. Her eyes were fixed on Chloe, who flinched as if struck by the sudden appearance of this small, elderly witness. Mrs. Miller, Chloe breathed, the name a shocked exhale. Chloe, Bea said, her tone neutral. She walked to the empty armchair and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. She said nothing else. Her presence was a wall of fact. Chloe's head whipped back toward me, her eyes wide with dawning horror. You set me up. You planned this. I investigated a crime, I corrected. And now I am documenting it. Mrs. Miller has heard your statements. She has seen the evidence. She is a witness to your confession regarding the fraudulent documents and your motive. I didn't confess to anything. You twisted my words. You stated I was a burden. You stated you were trying to use the equity in my home to solve your financial problems. You admitted to making the arrangements at the Evergreen. The physical evidence supports it. A prosecutor would call that a confession. My voice was a flat, factual recitation. You have two paths now, Chloe. The first involves the police. I will provide them with these documents, Mrs. Miller's statement, and the recording from the Evergreen residences confirming the reservation. You will be charged with fraud, forgery, and attempted elder financial abuse. You will likely go to jail. Your debt will remain, and you will have a criminal record. Her bravado was crumbling, replaced by the pallor of genuine fear. You wouldn't. Marcus would never forgive you. Marcus will be informed, regardless of the path. His forgiveness is a separate matter. Your concern should be your freedom. I let that sink in. I watched her mind racing, looking for an exit that wasn't there. The second path is cleaner. You provide a full, written and signed confession detailing everything. The forgery, the fraudulent reservation, the falsified care assessment, your financial motive. You sign it here now in front of two witnesses. And then what? You use it to destroy me anyway. No, if you provide a complete confession, I will not pursue criminal charges immediately. The confession will be held by my attorney. It will be a guarantee. You will sign a legally binding agreement to stay away from me, to make no further attempts to contact me or involve yourself in my affairs. You will also agree to enter a debt management counseling program. If you violate any of these terms, the confession goes directly to the district attorney. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. You've spoken to a lawyer. I have retained counsel, yes. The framework is prepared. This was a strategic exaggeration, but a necessary one. I had researched the steps. Formal retention could follow. She needed to believe the machinery of the law was already in motion, awaiting only her signature to either engage or stand down. You've thought of everything, she said, her voice hollow. I had to. You forced me to. I reached into the side table drawer and removed the single sheet of paper and the pen I had placed there. I slid them across the coffee table toward her. The sentence at the top waited. I, Chloe Ann Hayes, hereby confess that asterisk. Write it in your own words. Be specific. Include the date of the Evergreen reservation, the fact you forged my signature, your debt as the motive. Sign and date it at the bottom. Her hands were trembling. She looked at the paper as if it were a poison. She looked at B, whose expression was implacable. She looked back at me, and in that moment I saw the final collapse of her scheme. The fight drained out of her shoulders. She was cornered, and she knew it. She picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the paper. A tear of frustration or self-pity slid down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. But you set it in motion, I said. Right. She bent her head. The pen scratched against the paper. The room was silent except for that sound and the faint tick of the clock. B and I watched. She wrote for several minutes. She paused, wrote more. Her handwriting, usually so confident, was jagged. When she finished, she signed her name with a flourish that seemed defeated. She placed the pen down and pushed the paper back toward me. I read it without picking it up. It was all there. She had used clear, damning language. I forged Alina Hayes' signature on the residency agreement. I submitted a false care assessment form. I did this to gain access to the equity in her home to pay my personal debts. It was a perfect, self-incriminating narrative. I looked at B. Mrs. Miller, will you please witness this signature? B stood, walked to the table, and took the pen. Below Chloe's signature, she wrote, witnessed by Beatrice Miller, and added the date and time. She returned to her chair. I picked up the confession. I held it. The weight of it was insignificant, but its power was immense. It was my shield. It was her shackle. Now, I said, folding the paper once and placing it in my lap. You will leave. You will not speak to Marcus about this meeting. I will speak to him myself tonight. You will go home and you will wait. You will receive the formal agreement from my attorney's office tomorrow. You will sign it and return it. Is that understood? She nodded, a stiff, mechanical motion. Verbal confirmation, please. Yes, I understand. The words were barely audible. You may go. She stood up, unsteady on her feet. She did not look at either of us. She walked to the front door, fumbled with the handle, and let herself out. The door closed softly behind her. The living room was very quiet. Bea let out a long, slow breath. "Well," she said, "that was colder than a librarian's stare, and more effective." I looked at the folded confession in my hands. The cold focus that had sustained me began to recede, replaced by a profound, weary triumph. The first battle was over. The evidence was incontrovertible. I had her confession. But the war for my family was not won. The hardest conversation was still to come. I had to show my son what his wife had done and watch his world break. I placed the confession carefully back into the manila folder. The next step awaited me in my own kitchen. I waited until 7 o'clock. The confession was back in the hall closet. The evidence folder sat in the center of the kitchen table, a neutral ground for a devastating conversation. I reheated leftover pot roast, but I knew neither of us would eat much. Then I called him. "Marcus, can you come over? Now it's important." His voice tightened. "Is it your health? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine, but I need to speak with you. Alone, it's about Chloe." A long silence. "I'm on my way." He arrived in 15 minutes, which meant he had broken speed limits. He came through the back door into the kitchen, his eyes scanning me for signs of distress. "What's going on? What did Chloe do?" "Sit down, please." I gestured to the chair opposite the folder. He sat, his body tense. "Mom, you're scaring me. I have to show you some things. I need you to look at them carefully, and I need you to listen to me completely before you say anything. Can you do that?" He nodded, his jaw clenched. I opened the folder. I began with the credit report. "This is Chloe's credit report. I found it in my desk. I did not go looking for it. I found it while organizing my own papers." I slid it toward him. He looked at it, his brow furrowed. "Why would this be in your desk? This is private." I believe she put it there, perhaps inadvertently, among other papers she was bringing here. "Look at the balances, Marcus." His eyes tracked down the columns. The high numbers, the maxed-out cards, his face paled. "I knew there was some debt." She said it was under control. She said she was handling it. "She is not handling it. She is drowning in it." I placed the reverse mortgage brochures with the sticky note in front of him. "Options for EH. She was researching ways to access the equity in this house. My house." He stared at the note in her handwriting. She mentioned maybe you could downsize to help with retirement. I told her it wasn't our business." But she made it her business. I then placed the draft power of attorney on top. "I found this in my files, a draft nomming her as my attorney in fact. I did not draft this. I did not ask for it." His breathing became shallow. "Mom, what are you saying?" Finally, I placed the Evergreen Residences packet on the pile. 3 days ago, I received a call from this place, confirming my permanent residence check-in for the next day. I did not make a reservation. I went there. They showed me the paperwork. I pointed to the forged signature, then to Chloe's signature as the representative. She forged my name. She filled out a form stating I had cognitive decline and needed assisted living. She was attempting to have me committed, Marcus. To take control of my assets, sell this house, and use the money to pay her debts. He shot up from his chair, knocking it back. "No, that's insane. Chloe would never." "Sit down." My voice cut through his denial. "I am not finished." He righted his chair and sat, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "She came here today at 2 p.m., believing I was a confused old woman ready to be guided into a senior community. I let her present her brochures. I confronted her with this evidence. She admitted it. She called me a stubborn, independent burden. She justified her actions by saying she was relieving you of worry and solving her financial problems. Mrs. Miller was in the hallway as a witness. His face was a mask of horror. Bea was here. Yes, after Chloe admitted her motives and her actions, I presented her with a choice, a full written confession, or I would file criminal charges for fraud and attempted elder abuse immediately. I reached into the folder and removed the final sheet. I placed Chloe's signed confession in front of him. He read it. I watched his eyes move line by line over his wife's handwriting, detailing the forgery, the fraud, the motive. His shoulders began to shake. When he finished, he did not look up. He put his head in his hands. A low, wounded sound escaped him. It was the sound of a foundation cracking. I did not touch him. I let the truth settle in the silence between us. After a long time, he looked up. His eyes were red but dry. They were filled with a shattered understanding. All this time, her stress, her pushing about your future, it wasn't concern. It was a project, a criminal project. Yes. And I was. What, a useful idiot, someone to manage. You were an obstacle she was working around. She knew you would never agree, so she didn't ask. She acted. He pushed the confession away as if it were physically hot. What happens now? That is your choice to a degree. I have her confession. I have the evidence. I have a witness. I will be going to the police to file a report. That is non-negotiable. The law must have a record of this attempt. I took a breath. Your choice is whether you stand beside the woman who tried to destroy your mother or whether you stand apart from her. I will not ask you to choose. I am simply telling you what I am going to do. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since he'd arrived. He saw no hysteria, no vengeful glee. He saw calm, weary resolution. You've been planning this since you got that call. I have been defending myself. There is a difference. He nodded slowly. He looked back at the confession. She needs help, not just debt help, real help. That may be true, but it is not my responsibility to provide it. My responsibility is to protect myself and to see that justice is served. I will offer her a path to avoid jail, contingent on her compliance with strict conditions. But the legal record will stand. He stood up again, but this time it was a slow, heavy movement. He walked to the kitchen window and looked out into the dark yard. I loved her. I know you did. I have to talk to her. You will do what you must, but know that anything you say to her will be reported back to me through my attorney. Our communications from this point are part of a legal process. Do not warn her. Do not advise her to flee. That would make you an accessory after the fact. He turned, his expression grim. I won't. I need to hear it from her. I need to see if there's anything left of the person I married. That is a reasonable need, but do it tonight. Tomorrow, B and I go to the police station. He came back to the table. He did not touch the papers again. He looked at me, his eyes full of a painful, adult understanding. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have seen it. I should have stopped it. You couldn't see what she hid. The failure is hers, not yours. I finally reached out and covered his hand with mine. But now you see it. What you do with that sight is what defines you. He squeezed my hand, then let go. I'll go now. I'll call you after. Be careful, Marcus. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Of my own wife, yeah. He left the way he came. I cleared the table, putting the evidence folder away. The hardest conversation was done. The truth was delivered. The consequences were now in motion. The morning was clear and cool. I dressed in a simple navy dress, something sober and respectable. I made coffee and waited for B. She arrived precisely at 9, carrying a large handbag and wearing a determined expression. Ready? She asked. I am. I had the evidence folder and Chloe's confession in a separate, sealed envelope. We drove to the police station in my car, a familiar 15-minute route through neighborhoods that felt distant from the drama of the last 72 hours. The station was a low, brick building from the 1970s. The lobby was a study in worn linoleum and muted colors. A ceiling fan turned slowly. A young officer behind a thick plexiglass window directed us to a bench to wait for someone from the Family and Community Services unit. We sat. Bea patted my knee once, a gesture of solidarity, then kept her hands folded in her lap. About 10 minutes later, a door buzzed open and a woman in uniform emerged. She was in her 40s, with a calm, attentive face and her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Ramirez. She approached us. Mrs. Hayes, Mrs. Miller, I'm Officer Ramirez. You wanted to report a crime. Yes, I said, standing. It involves fraud, forgery, and attempted financial exploitation. She nodded, her expression becoming professionally grave. All right, come with me, please. She led us through the buzzing door and down a short hallway to a small, windowless interview room. It contained a rectangular table and 4 chairs. A recording device sat in the center. "You can have a seat. I'll need to take a formal statement. Would you like some water?" "No, thank you," I said. Bea also declined. Officer Ramirez sat across from us, opening a notepad. "Start from the beginning, please. Tell me what happened." I did. I began with the phone call from the Evergreen residences. I described my visit there and the documents I was shown. I explained my relationship to Chloe Hayes. I then detailed my discovery of the other items in my home: the credit report, the brochures, the draft power of attorney. I presented each physical piece of evidence as I mentioned it, sliding them across the table. Officer Ramirez examined each one carefully, making notes. "And you confronted the suspect?" she asked. "I did, yesterday afternoon. I invited her under the pretext of discussing downsizing. I recorded the conversation on my home phone's answering machine, which has a record function." This was a strategic simplification. I had used a separate digital recorder, but the principle was the same. I placed the small recorder on the table. "With your permission, I can play the relevant sections where she admits to the forgery and states her motive." Officer Ramirez's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That would be helpful. Please go ahead." I played the clipped audio segments. Chloe's voice, first slick and persuasive, then defensive, and finally explosive. "You are a burden. I was trying to make a plan for everyone." The sound was clear in the sterile room. When it finished, Officer Ramirez's face was set in a frown of clear disapproval. "I see. And you have a witness to this confrontation." "I do. Mrs. Miller was present, concealed in an adjacent hallway. She heard the entire exchange and entered the room as a witness when I signaled." Bea spoke for the first time. "I witnessed it all, officer, every word. I also witnessed the suspect sign the written confession." I then placed the sealed envelope containing Chloe's handwritten confession on the table. After the confrontation, I presented her with a choice. She chose to provide this full written confession to avoid immediate criminal filing. I advised her it would be reviewed by my attorney and could still be used in a legal proceeding. Officer Ramirez put on a pair of latex gloves from her belt, opened the envelope, and read the confession. She took her time. When she looked up, her gaze was direct. "Mrs. Hayes, this is a very serious matter. You've done an exceptional job of documenting it. What is it you want the police to do today?" "I want to file a formal report for fraud and attempted elder financial abuse. I want an official record of this crime. I am not necessarily asking for her immediate arrest at this moment, as I have a proposed civil agreement that may preclude prosecution if she complies. However, I need the criminal report on file to enforce that agreement and to protect myself and others should she violate the terms or attempt this again. The report is my insurance." Officer Ramirez nodded slowly. "That's a prudent approach. The confession and your evidence give us a strong basis for a report. It will be up to the district attorney whether to pursue criminal charges independently of any civil agreement, but your filing creates a permanent record." She began filling out a multi-page form on a clipboard. "I'll need full names, addresses, dates of birth for everyone involved, and your contact information." For the next 40 minutes, we worked through the paperwork. It was bureaucratic and slow. Bea provided her witness statement verbally, which Officer Ramirez transcribed. I signed several pages. Officer Ramirez made copies of all my evidence on a small scanner in the corner of the room, returning the originals to me. Finally, she handed me a slip of paper with a case number on it. "This is your reference number. The report is now filed. I've flagged it for review by our financial crimes detective. Someone may contact you for follow-up. You should also consider a formal restraining order based on this." "I will discuss that with my attorney," I said, taking the slip. The numbers felt significant. "Thank you, officer, for taking it seriously." Officer Ramirez gave a small, tight smile. "It is serious. I see this too often. Families preying on elders. It's good to see someone fight back with such clear evidence. It makes our job possible." We stood. She buzzed us back out to the lobby. The transition from the quiet interview room to the public space was abrupt. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. B and I walked out to the car in silence. The weight of the folder in my hands was different now. It was no longer just my private arsenal. It was part of an official file. The law had acknowledged the truth. I started the car. B fastened her seatbelt. "Well," she said, "that's that. It's in the system." "It is." I pulled out of the parking lot. The ordinary world continued outside the car windows. People bought groceries, filled their gas tanks, lived their lives. I felt a strange sense of alignment. My private war had been registered with the authorities. Justice was no longer a personal concept. It was a process that had begun its slow, inevitable turn. The next steps were administrative. The attorney, the formal agreement, the restructuring of a broken family. But the core battle, the fight for my home and my autonomy, was conclusively won. The evidence was immutable. The confession was signed. The police had a record. Chloe's fate, both legal and personal, was now a matter of procedure and consequence. The cold focus that had driven me for 3 days began to soften at the edges, allowing in the first faint sensation of peace. The weeks that followed were not a celebration, but a gradual settling, like soil after a hard rain. The legal processes moved forward with a slow, bureaucratic certainty. My attorney formalized the agreement with Chloe. She would enter a debt management program, undergo mandatory financial counseling, and have no contact with me. The signed confession was held in escrow, a permanent sword of Damocles. Marcus moved out of their apartment and into a temporary rental. The divorce proceedings had begun. It was all very civil and very sad. Life, however, resumed its rhythms. It was a late spring afternoon, the air warm and carrying the scent of lavender and cut grass. I was in the garden, kneeling on my padded mat, pruning the spent blooms from the roses. The earth was dark and damp under my fingers, a familiar grounding texture. My knees protested, a familiar, manageable ache. I heard the gate click open. I looked up, shielding my eyes from the low sun. It was Marcus. He carried a small paper bag. He looked thinner, but his posture was straighter, less burdened. "Hey, Mom." "Marcus, I didn't know you were coming by." "I was in the neighborhood. Brought you some of that peach tea you like." He held up the bag. "That's thoughtful, thank you." I pushed myself up, wiping my hands on my apron. "Let's go inside. I'll put the kettle on." We went into the kitchen. I busied myself with the tea, giving him space. He sat at the table, the same seat he'd occupied during the terrible conversation. "How are you?" I asked, placing a mug in front of him. "Managing. Work is a good distraction. The apartment is fine." He took a sip. "I saw the final agreement from your lawyer. It's fair. More than fair, given everything." It was never about punishment for punishment's sake. It was about security. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "She started the counseling, the debt program. She's complying. It doesn't make it right, but it's something." I nodded. I did not ask for details. Her journey was her own now, separate from mine. "And you? Are you getting the support you need?" "Therapy, once a week, it helps. It helps to talk to someone who isn't involved." He looked at me, his expression open and weary. "I'm sorry, Mom, not just for what she did, for my part in it, for being so blind, for letting her talk about you like a problem to be solved." "You weren't blind. You were trusting. There's a difference. And you stopped her when you saw the truth. That's what matters now." We drank our tea. The silence was not comfortable, but it was honest. It was the silence of people acknowledging a shared wound that would scar, but not fester. After he left, I returned to the garden. The light was turning golden, long shadows stretching across the lawn. I finished the pruning, collected the cuttings in a basket. The work was simple, absorbing. Another click at the gate. B this time, holding a small clay pot with a thriving green plant, its leaves variegated and sturdy. "Eleanor, I was dividing my spider plant. Thought this one needed a home where it wouldn't be schemed against." A faint, real smile touched my lips. "Thank you, B. It's welcome here." She set the pot on the porch step and sat down beside it, groaning slightly. "Saw Marcus's car leave. How is he?" "Healing. It will take time." "For both of you." She looked out over the garden. "It's looking good, better than ever." "It's resilient. It just needs care and to be left to grow in its own space." We sat in companionable quiet for a while, watching the day end. When the first mosquitoes began to hover, B stood. "All right, I'm off. Book club tomorrow, don't forget." "I won't." After she left, I carried the new spider plant inside and placed it on the kitchen windowsill, where the morning sun would reach it. I washed my hands, made a light dinner, and ate while reading a library book. The house was quiet, but the quiet was full, not empty. It was the sound of peace. When the last of the dusk faded to full dark, I completed my evening routine. I checked the back door was locked. I turned off the lights, moving from room to room. I walked to the front door. I placed my hand on the solid wood, feeling its familiar grain. I slid the deadbolt home. The sound was a clean, decisive thunk of metal engaging. I tested the handle. It did not move. I stood there for a moment in the dark hallway. The house around me was still, safe, and entirely mine. No one held a key to my future but me. The battle was over. The victory was not in ruin or grand spectacle, but in this ordinary moment. A locked door, a quiet house, a garden waiting for tomorrow's sun, and the simple, unassailable fact of my own continued life within these walls. I turned and walked upstairs to bed.